What's up, everyone? Online prep coach Asker here at theprepcoach.com, and I'm recording this seminar literally because 1 hour ago someone told me to. So backtrack a little bit. I'm very proud to say that I've been helping a specific political group in the background with some of the new medicine 3.0 and really peptide terminology and figuring out how to get different, say, laws and things passed and things be more socially acceptable. So this kind of really started for me last year, really hit hard mid-year, and then really picked up as the last year ended. And obviously in the new year now, things are really picking up for medicine 3.0. So the whole peptide world and peptide scape and all the people getting involved, it's getting very mainstream. And I'm very happy to say that I've been a very, very, very small part of that. So I've been helping on the back end really to break down terminology in the application side of things. So what's seen in research versus what happens in application and how things can be broken down and talked about to really sell these things to be as cool as they really are. So because of all that, I wanted to go ahead and, again, I literally got a text saying that heavily implied that I need to start posting up more peptide content for some plans that I'm going to be playing a part of and I'll be doing in the rest of 2025, going into 2026, heavy in 2026. So because of that, I'm literally here. I thought the best way to start everything off, on top of doing everything with Jay Campbell's podcast and Hunter Williams, is going ahead and doing an actual breakdown on the basics. So literally breaking down the actual cheat sheet, basically a cheat sheet version on some of the more popular peptides out there. Now, this list can go on and on. I'm going to literally just start rambling them off, putting things on the board. But first, as always, I like to talk about some of the basics. And I think and this is what I spent months trying to convey this to a lot of the political figures I was talking with. When I say political figures, it's one specific group of people. I'm not dealing with the direct politicians involved. It's the people surrounding them that then are trying to push it and then get them to be the face to say, hey, we're pushing this to the public. So trying to get that specific group to understand why peptides are so different. So everything in this world, we're looking at the basics of pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. That means we have to understand these things differently, because if you look out there in the research, things are applied one way. If you look how people apply them in application, they're applied a different way. So how do you sift through all the noise and figure out, okay, what's the right way to do it? This is where the art of medicine comes in. That's why there isn't, although whenever you're at your doctor's, they'll plug and play the body weight mix per kg on doses and things like that, because that's very valid. But there's still that art. There's still that ability for the doctor to say, you know what? My gut's telling me no, we're gonna go with this and switch things up a little bit. That's where this portion on the basics of kinetics and dynamics really comes in. So I think basically what we have to start off with, first of all, is really looking at just that, the basics. We're looking at chemical signaling thresholds versus linear concepts. And this is applied to literally all of medicine. So it's pretty important to understand. So if we're looking at linear versus threshold, chemical signaling concepts. It is exactly what it sounds like. Linear thresholds mean that as you escalate a dose, a chemical signal, same verbiage, the effects get better and better and better and better. And at some point, obviously, there will be a tipping point for everyone. There will always be that bell curve-based response. But in general, we're looking at things chemical signaling-wise only improving as dosage comes up. Whereas threshold is essentially you need to have this amount of a milligram application or microgram or whatever arbitrary number there, or measurement rather, in order to get enough of a chemical signal to see any difference. So linear is essentially positive escalating action. Everything always has a tipping point though, whereas threshold is more looking at minimum amounts. So in the threshold scenario, you need enough. Let's use milligrams because that's easier to talk about. In the linear concept, 1 milligram is going to work the same as 2, but 2 is going to work that much better. And then 3 is going to work even that much better. And then 4 milligrams is going to work even that much better for whatever arbitrary peptide we're talking about. Whereas threshold, in order to get the minimum amount, we are going to do 1 milligram, because below 1 milligram, we're not going to see anything. Whereas in the linear concept, if you did 500 micrograms, you're still seeing action, but not as much as 1 milligram, not as much as 1.5 milligrams. And you kind of have that scenario to just play with in your head. But we have those basics to understand. Then we also have two other things that are very important: non-genomic and genomic action. You guys have heard me talk about these all the times. non-genomic, and then we're looking at genomic. And again, these are very important to understand because it's not just applied for this seminar. This is for all pharmacology. This is for all supplementation. In reality, because everyone likes to generally say how over-the-counter supplements are a sham or don't work, or peptides don't work or whatever. And in reality, all these over-the-counter supplements and peptides work so well. You may not be a candidate for all of them, but they work so well because of these concepts. So in this chemical signaling world, we are looking at everything having a non-genomic effect. What that means is picoseconds. Literally, the moment you apply something, swallow something, the moment it enters your system, exogenously, so coming from the outside, coming in, it has an immediate non-genomic effect. So that's more looking at the basic signal transductions. That means right now. So that is very, very acute actions, right? Whereas genomic, that's where we're looking more at our overall epigenetics. That's where we're looking at the genetic change that's happening over the next couple of days, weeks, months, years. So that is where we have our actual longer term chronic actions. So if we're understanding these basics on chemical signaling, I think now we can kind of begin to understand why these peptides can be applied so many different ways. Which of these peptides exist and operate on a linear chemical signaling dosage paradigm? Which ones operate on a threshold concept? It also changes based on the goal you're trying to utilize it for. And then, are we trying to use a compound, a peptide, a supplement, whatever, for non-genomic actions or genomic actions? That changes frequency. So you have frequency, you have dosage, you have duration, all worked out because of those four concepts, which are very important to understand. So we know those, we understand those. Let's get into talking some of the basics. And again, there's a lot to go through here, so we're just gonna start listing them off. We're not gonna get through all of them, obviously, because the list is gonna go on, and there's a lot of ones that I don't wanna talk about yet because either formulating them and coming out with new products or other reasons. We'll just leave it at that. So basics. Let's just start listing them down here, right? I'll kind of mark this off. So basics. Let's start off with the basics that everyone knows. We have our BPC 157. We have our TB 500. We have our GHKCU. We have our KPV. So we're going to start here, and again, we'll slowly work our way down through some other ones. Okay, so generally speaking, we're looking to look at all of the actions these things can drive. Primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary aspects. So all these peptides, the reason why peptides are so cool is because they do 100+ actions, because they're working on so many different systems and subsystems. The problem with that, though, is you kind of look at a peptide, see it has all these potentials. What do I do? Your mind gets blown because it has all these actions. What am I primarily trying to use it for? We're looking at why do you need it? So BPC-wise, I'm a big fan of looking at more for the overall tissue-based healing. It has some cool interactions downstream with that MAPK cascade, so we can drive some cool changes to cancer cell apoptosis. We can drive some cool changes to soft articular cartilage. You can drive some really cool overall effects with BPC multiple different ways. So if we're trying to weed through all the noise, I'm looking at primary reasons. And again, the primary reason is going to change based on what you need. So literally look at the list of the research of what BPC has the potential to do, and then go ahead and say, okay, I need this action. That's going to be its primary reason. That's why I'm going to use it. And that's why it's hard to help with the verbiage in the background, the political side of things, because they do so many things. So we're going to focus on primary. Why do I personally tend to use? Through my lens, why am I usually using BPC to heal? Mainly from a tissue-based aspect. So if we just kind of blanket statement, because you could also get to the actin sequestering side of things, let's just look at blanket statement, tissue healing, okay? So we're saying overall tissue. So if we're looking at an overall tissue healer, we're going to say tissue healing. Now, TB 500. TB 500 is something that can be utilized, and by the way, let's backtrack a little bit. BPC 157, can also be utilized to actually agonize. So to actually potentiate, stimulate, and cause overexpression of growth hormone related receptors. So if you're taking exogenous growth hormone through your doctor, or if you are just trying to improve your overall somatropic action, BPC is also going to be a friend. Again, that's a quaternary action. That's downstream. We're focused on primary. TB500. My primary reason for utilizing it and what makes it so different than any other peptide out there is I believe, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe it's the only peptide out there that turns on neonatal gene expression. So picture yourself in today. So I'm 31 years old. So if I was 31 years old today and I never had any damage to my organs, to my tissues, to anything, at this point in time, that's what these genes are turning things onto. So we're essentially reverting back to how we should be at this point in our life if there was no damage. So how things were if we were a fresh baby, but a baby at 31 years later, basically. So no oxidation, no inflammation, no insult. TB500 does a tremendous job of that. Again, I'm pretty sure it's the only player out there that actually turns on those neonatal genes, which is pretty phenomenal, right? So it's going to actually turn on those neonatal genes. And of course, as I'm talking, this marker's running out. So I'm going to throw that away. I almost hit the crayon. That would have been funny because I don't edit these. So if that would have knocked, I would have just picked it back up, kept going. I specifically don't like editing because to me, and again, I just decided to record this a couple minutes ago, an hour ago actually. But to me, if I can't just go through all these things, then I obviously don't know what I'm talking about. And I shouldn't have to edit them to go check my notes, come back, and all that kind of fun stuff. So either way, if that would hit the camera, I would have had to pick it back up. Glad it didn't because that'd be ugly. But TB500 also does some awesome things in terms of a stroke. So if you just had a stroke, if you just had a catastrophic neurological event, TB500 comes in to start reversing that damage immediately. I think one of the most well-known cases of this was actually Carl Lenore. So Carl Lenore, I actually got to meet him in person. We've talked, actually, I got to call him. So Carl, I'll be calling you soon. I forgot. I got to meet him at the end of last year. Awesome dude. He used to run a really, really popular podcast. Stopped doing it since then. He had a stroke and while the ambulance was coming to him, utilized TB500. And after he got out of the hospital, they released him because there was no sign of strokes, even though he was literally having a stroke in the moment. So, and he's not the first one. I think he's just probably one of the more well-known people to actually go through that. But we can actually reverse all of that neurological trauma and damage if it's applied acutely. So this is where we're going back to non-genomic actions versus neonatal genes. That's going to be more of your genomic player. So TB500 is an awesome one. And this is where you also get into the application side of things with BPC and TB, because the combination together of activated neonatal genes and then driving tissue healing, the complement driving organ-based healing, this is where if you have an insult and injury of any kind, we're kind of favoring the combination in the moment as soon as humanly possible. You tear a muscle fiber, both. You have a stroke, TB. You blow out your knee, both. There's a reason to utilize both in singular, but no matter what, these are very acutely used for those kinds of, obviously acute traumas. So we have those, again, going through the primary reasons now. GHKCU, blue copper peptide. We know beautiful looking hair, right? Beautiful looking skin. At least I don't know if I have good looking skin actually. I think I have decent hair. I like my hair, besides that line from my blue light glasses. But I love GHKCU for multiple reasons. Dermally, so skin-wise, follicularly with your hair, it can drive up that positive protein translation process. So we can really drive the growth and repair process of our hair, of our skin, of our nails, of all those kinds of cool things. But again, to me, that's kind of secondary. What's the primary reason that we could be using GHKCU for? To me, it drives stem cell migration, which again, of all peptides out there, it does this one pretty much the best. So if we're looking at the increase, that's a better color. Stem cell migration. That increase in stem cell migration means that you can take this before stem cell therapy or around exosome therapy to get more action out of those therapies. This also means it's a great complement to something that turns on neonatal genes and also something that drives tissue-based healing, because stem cells are kind of at the baseline of everything. So you can see, again, as we're going through this list, these peptides do so many awesome things What's the primary reason? Again, that can change, but we're just gonna give examples on primary action through my lens today. We could be using GHKCU to reduce fibrosis in erectile tissue. We could be using it for multiple different reasons, primary, primary, primary. So we have that. KPV, looking at that alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, that specific portion, that is one of the coolest players because what does it do? Drastically downregulates inflammation. So if you're looking for an overall way to tank inflammation, let's say hsCRP is 10 plus. Let's say that interleukin 6 is sky high. This is one of the best players for that because of the limited interactions with dopamine receptors. Talk about that in a second. So primary action with KPV, right? We're looking to downregulate inflammation. Now, BPC 157 is an awesome one, like we talked about, but it has the potential to screw up dopamine receptor neurotransmission. So it can actually skew how dopamine, the ligand, binds with the dopamine receptors, multiple different kinds as well. So we can see that potential. That's probably only the negative side effect of BPC. TB500 has very, very few minimal side effects. Same thing with GHK, same thing with KPV. If you are someone who has any kind of neurological disorder, if you're over in the post-finasteride world, if you're someone who has high anxiety, depression, things like that, if there's any dopaminergic problem, maybe, where's BPC? There we go. Maybe you don't use BPC. Maybe instead you won't get the direct tissue healing, but at least you'll pull down the excessive inflammation in an area so that you can oxygenate it, you can hydrate it, and you can recover it. So usually KPV is a really good option if you just need basic inflammation or if you can't use BPC but still need some actual additional healing. So that's a really cool one to bring in. It has tons of different therapies, tons of different utilizations, but the primary one's going to be there. We're going to go through, and again, we're just going to list some different things. So let's start off with, okay, I got one. Let's go with MOTC. CB4211, oxytocin. And by the way, as this goes on, it might not just be technically what are classified as peptides. There's so many things out here in this kind of ancillary world that are, they might be hormones, they might not, they might be small molecules, they might be just amino acids. There's so many different classifications these days. It's going to be kind of a little blend of everything because technically, oxytocin is a hormone, but we're talking about it in this peptide conversation, so we're going to mix it up a little bit. And that's where, again, going back to writing the proper terminology. It's not really out there. And if it is, it's skewed because everyone has their own terminology and differences. So I want to make sure that I'm making this clear that this is my terminology of talking about peptides as a whole. I don't know why I'm doing so many air quotes. MOTC, so mitochondrial open reading frame of the 12th sRNA-C. That's literally what it stands for. If you look inside those mitochondria, if you kind of zoom in there, we were looking at those mitochondria having their own DNA, okay? So we have our mitochondrial DNA. So within our mitochondria, remember we drew that picture beforehand in the last seminar, right? We had all those invaginations going in. We had a bunch of different layers, bunch of different things going on. We had those mitochondrial DNA in there. They release things called short open reading frames. So they're releasing these short frames, I'll do SF for short frames, and then those are releasing all of these different peptides. Some of those, one of those is this variation, that MOTC variety, okay? And that's telling you literally location, what it's meant to do. So we should also actually add some other mitochondrial ones while we're down here. We'll do SS31, and then SLU, PP, 332, and then we'll go over there and talk more about it. But MOTC, this is one where we have a lot of spillover with a lot of different de novo-based processes. We see the modulation of AMPK and mTOR. We see the changes to nutrient utilization and partitioning. We see MOTC being a very big cardiac player. So I've used this to reverse and fix a lot of different cardiac myopathies, left ventricular hypertrophies, fibrosis, go down the list of different heart-based problems. MOTC does a tremendous job over in that world. And overall, we kind of see this. I like seeing MOTC as the in-between player, right? So I had to write the SS31 and the SLU because these are the other, we'll say these are the three kind of big mitochondrial peptides. One people that aren't familiar with yet is going to be CB4211. That's a MOTC analog. So we got 4 here, then oxytocin. I should have wrote that later on, but whatever. So MOTS, we're mainly seeing this as being the little bit of everything player. So because it's coming from the mitochondrial DNA, because it's operating on these short open reading frames, it has the potential to drive just as many health cascades as it does body composition and performance cascades. So MOTS is kind of like our overall health and body composition and performance player, okay? So it's kind of a blend of everything, right? Whereas CB42 actually drives up that insulin receptor activation and can drive down, there's a different variation too that drives down fibrosis, but that's the thing that pretty much this MOTS analog drives a tremendous amount of nutrient partitioning, which has spillover into the health world, but I see this as being the biggest nutrient partitioner out there. So if we have MOTS, this is gonna be our blend of, we're gonna say, blend of performance, we're gonna have our blend of body composition, we're gonna have our blend of overall health markers, right? Whereas CB4211, although it has the ability to drive up improved health markers, all these have the ability to drive up health markers, primary. I see it mainly being the biggest nutrient partitioner out there because of what it's doing to improve the insulin receptors themselves. That means you can also use it for diabetics. So a lot of spillover, but I see this as being like the world's coolest nutrient partitioner, okay? Now we have SS31 and we have SLU PP332. We have the whole SLU summoner out there. Not gonna talk about that too much, but we see SLU also as having a lot of spillover to performance, body composition, and health. I still see it, even though I've used it to reverse a lot of renal hepatic problems and ocular problems and things like that. I see SLU as being more closer towards the performance and body composition player, but in reality, it has so much spillover to all of those other health-based cascades. I see that as being the overall best mitochondrial player. If you're trying to get a little bit of everything, or if you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, SLU is going to be that option. Beta oxidation, anabolism, also changing AMPK cascades at different times of the day, driving longevity. It does a lot of really cool things. So to me, SLU is going to be the overall best mitochondrial player for everything we're talking about here. Sorry, I keep stepping out of frame. I got to change that next time. Either way, now we have the SS31. This is the one where dosage comes into play. The price tag on SS31 is higher than all these other mitochondrial peptides. It works extremely well. This is the thing to use if you are in, I just posted up today actually, a CKD case, so chronic kidney disease. If you have kidney failure, if you have heart failure, SS31 is always going to be your option. Has obviously some spillover because of where it's working in the mitochondria to do different things from a nutrient partitioning, beta oxidative lipolytic aspect, but it's still going to be the biggest health player. The only problem is it comes with a bigger price tag, so you're going to need to dose it a little bit higher. So that's usually the off-putting reason why a lot of people don't utilize it, because to utilize it properly, dosages have to go pretty high and you usually run into other problems. So to me, this is going to be the overall, we're going to say the health mitochondrial peptide, right? And again, there's other cascades you could be utilizing it, but to me, I see it as mainly being the health-based player. If someone else sees SS31 out there as a different player, that's cool. It's through your lens. Depending on how you're utilizing it, it might be a completely different, it might not be a health product. You may be utilizing it to repair your mitochondria to get better action on the field or in the gym or on the court, whatever. So it depends on the lens. But to me, we have better players to drive performance and body composition overall with MOTS or SLU, whereas we have SS31 being kind of the biggest health player, and then we have CB4211 being the biggest insulin reception change player. So, oxytocin. We've talked about this beforehand. Lots of cool cascades, lots of cool changes we can do to sexual performance. So your ability to have a good orgasm, your ability to actually climax, your ability to not just have, because for females, the frequency of orgasms will go up as well as the strength, even more than the erectile tissue, because remember, females, males and females, it's erectile tissue. It's the same tissue, just different sizes in different places. But beyond the sexual cascades, I see oxytocin as being a very awesome body composition player. It's the only compound out there, and this is where a lot of the old TREN research came from, on why it was so good at recomping, beyond what it did with thyroid hormone. Oxytocin does a cool job of driving that biotransformation process of adipocyte to myocyte. So it literally drives the conversion process of utilizing stored energy in body fat to fuel anabolism. So if you kind of are thinking about it as like the overall best recomping tool of all the peptides out there, oxytocin is going to be your biggest recomping tool. So we're going to say overall recomp as the primary cascade, secondary cascade. We're going to do ED, but in reality, we're looking at all forms of sexual functioning, males and females. A really cool combination that we won't go too much into. But what I've been doing lately with some of my harder cases that have really bad ED is we will actually pair oxytocin. So I got to write this out. It's pretty cool. So we have our oxytocin. We're going to have our Livogen or our Vylon. And then we're going to have our actual, I always spell this one wrong, so I probably spell it wrong, your copulins. Now, in this scenario, this is a very cool protocol to utilize if you're having severe, extreme sexual dysfunction, males or females. Oxytocin is going to go ahead and drive the actual erectile cascades, as well as the orgasmic dopaminergic cascades. Livogen or Vylon, depending on how you're trying to modulate chromatin, either very far upstream or very kind of midstream, that's going to change how you can actually unroll or decondense chromatin. So it'll allow you to make an epigenetic change. So that's going to allow you to change, I'm just going to say genetics, but it's really epigenetics if you want to be technical, because that's happening right now. And the copulins, this is, you can have them mainly for female pheromones. So this tends to work a lot better over in the male-based world. We're mainly looking at this for male-based sexual dysfunction. We would change this play if we're looking at the female-based side of things, but we'll go over those protocols later on. I'm getting off track. The copulins are female pheromones, essentially. So having that actual smell will directly increase testosterone, directly increase prefrontal cortex action to then drive all these cascades even harder. So this is the thing, if you look in the research where it says that a male in the presence of a female who's ovulating will increase their testosterone levels and things like that, it's those copulins, it's that pheromone-based response. It's all going olfaction. So through the nose, it's connected to the hippocampus and the amygdala. So we're having literally emotions and memories. So we can do some really cool things there then to alter some other things as well with females. But again, topic for a different day. I'm getting off track. You guys know I like to talk. And yes, I do annoy my wife because I talk too much, but that's okay. So now we're going to go through a couple other ones. We have a lot of different ones. Let's go into actually the thymic peptides and yeah, let's do some thymic peptides. I think that one would be pretty cool because there's a whole bunch to talk about over there. And we also have all the different GLPs, GIPs, all that kind of fun stuff. So let's do we have semaglutide. Yeah, I did that. Semaglutide. We have tirzepatide. Surprised I'm spelling these right. Semaglutide, tirzepatide, retatrutide. We're not going to talk about the other ones that will be coming out later. That's going to be for a different one. Actually, I'm going to be presenting at FOH Live at the end of this month. Jake Campbell seminar down in Tampa, Florida. Go there. I'm going to be presenting a cool seminar. So I'll be talking about some stage 4, stage 5 stuff coming out soon. And then let's go into the actual thymogen alpha 1. Thymolin. And then thymosin alpha 1. And we might as well put BAM 15. We'll do FX 11. And we might as well do Neuropept. Might as well do Dihexa. Okay, I'll stop because if not, you guys just see my back that whole time. So going down the list, semaglutide, tirzepatide, or retatrutide. What we saw was this evolutionary process. So we saw the GLP-1 agonist being semaglutide. So we're seeing this as being our main GLP-1, whereas then tirzepatide came in and did GLP plus GIP. Then retatrutide came in and we did GLP plus GIP plus GCG. So we're seeing a lot of spillover between the glucagon cascades, the GIP cascades, and the other GCG cascades. So what we tend to see in actual application is semaglutide manages hunger drastically well. Semaglutide is one that you can use to actually microdose and utilize in different scenarios to help to downregulate that cocaine amphetamine-based receptor in the brain to help come off of addictive behaviors. So whether it be alcohol or drugs, I've had a lot of people have some problems over in that based world. Semaglutide, to me, if we're trying to delineate between these two, because they're all going to cause some amount of fat loss, they're going to cause some amount of indirect anabolism, they're all going to cause some amount of appetite management via changes to how you actually crave food or water or don't, and also changes the gastric motility. They're all going to have a lot of crossover and spillover. So if we're trying to delineate these and say, okay, number one, what's the primary reason? Of all of these, straight GLP-1 semaglutide has the best potential to be the neurological nootropic player. So if you're trying to manage hunger, if you're trying to lose a little bit of body fat, but you also need a better driver on neurology, generally semaglutide comes in as kind of a better player. So we're going to say that's going to be our nootropic of choice, right? And again, it's going to change based on the person and your response and everything, but they're all going to have a lot of coactions. Now, that's also if you want to ease your foot into this whole world of GLP-based agonists and similar agonists. Because every time you go up, chemical signaling goes up, okay? So tirzepatide, we then come in, and now we tend to see a pretty good driver on overall nutrient partitioning, a really good reduction in appetite, a really big player to reduce gastric motility, and tirzepatide seems to be a really big player in driving up the overall insulin reception cascade. So I tend to see tirzepatide, if we're again trying to delineate between these things, this is the one that tends to reduce hunger the most. Whereas retatrutide, because of the glucagon overstimulation, we tend to see retatrutide being the most anabolic of all of these because of the microvasculature changes and because of the indirect and direct mTOR stimulation that you get from hyper-antagonizing that glucagon-based receptor. So we're going to see this as being more of the anabolic player, and at a lot of doses, it's going to actually increase your hunger. So that's one where you might have to dose it higher over time. We never want to start off too high. I'm going to have to dose it higher over time in order to combat that hunger-based response. Usually, if you're trying to avoid hunger at all costs, we're looking more so at something like a tirzepatide or semaglutide. Again, there's a lot of crossover and spillover. As you move up, well, it's actually down, but as you move down here, they're having a higher chemical signaling strength and potential. That means that what's going to happen? The potential for negative side effects goes up. This is where RID, retatrutide-induced dysfunction, comes in, where you can have those massive immune responses because it's so chemically strong. But that can also just mean you just take less. So if you're trying to get your overall best, a little bit of everything, we generally tend to go with retatrutide because the heaviest, biggest chemical signal that's hitting all three cascades. If we're trying to get in between action, tirzepatide. If we're trying to get the bare minimum action, semaglutide. And then again, that changes based on the dose, the duration. If you're trying to use it more as a way to wean off of different drugs and things like that, you get where we're going with that. But that's one where you can debate back and forth about which one is the best one. In reality, it's never the best one. It's more which one and how much of a chemical response do you need. So all out going crazy, retatrutide. Tirzepatide, step back. Semaglutide, another step back. Because that's how evolution works, right? We start with one, two agonisms, three agonisms, then these agonists are going to keep going. Now, thymic peptides. Thymogen alpha-1, thymolin, and thymosin alpha-1. So I talked about this in one of my other seminars, so I won't spend too much time on it. We are looking more at preglandular, glandular, and postglandular action, right? So this is going to be preglandular. This is going to be glandular. And this is going to be postglandular action. So what this means is we're kind of working backwards from here in terms of when do we need our chemical actions? This is where and why we talked about in the beginning, do we need non-genomic or genomic effects, right? So this thymosin alpha-1, that is pretty much the most acute non-genomic player out there, right? Because we are not even worried about the thymic gland. We're going straight past it and we're saying, just heal, just do this right now. So this is going to be our biggest acute player, right? That's going to be our biggest non-genomic player. Thymolin is convincing the gland to work itself, which is not going to work right now, but in a little bit, right? So this is going to be more of our moderate timing chemical signaling player. Whereas thymogen alpha 1, which is the pre-glandular action, that's the one that's going to have to go all through the process of pre-gland, gland, post-glandular action. That's going to take the longest. So that means it's going to be the genomic player, which is going to be the longest player, right? That is exactly why I talked about it beforehand, and I do thymogen alpha 1 therapy every Saturday and Sunday. One capsule, one on Saturday, one on Sunday, because I'm trying to promote long-term thymic health, long-term immunity. So we have those players. Now we have two little players used for a couple different reasons. So if we're looking at BAM15, this is the protonophore translocator. So if we go through the whole process of glycolysis into electron transport chain, and we're looking at those complexes, right? As we're skipping those electrons, as we're pushing protons and all that kind of fun stuff around, what can happen is instead of going all the end way to ATPase, you can actually bleed through. So you can literally push these protons. So if we can kind of imagine it, complex 1, we'll do these complexes. So we're essentially going to have, that'll be our ATPase. And so as we're moving through this process in the electron transport chain, we're essentially seeing that skipping process go along to get to ATPase to ultimately give us that end fate of energy, okay? What's happening here is we are pushing and moving these protons along, right? So protons are going to be moving along this entire cascade. Whereas whenever you use a protonophore uncoupler, a proton translocator, we have this same scenario. And again, these are supposed to be complexes, electron transport chain, but I don't want to spend too much time on this because I have a whole seminar coming out on this. So now instead of those having to skip and those having to move around and shift, instead of getting a proton shift, we get that proton flux. So it bleeds through. Those protons will bleed through. And what do you get? Heat dissipation. What does that do? That drives up lipolysis. That drives up beta oxidation. The heat in internal tissue and receptor changes increase anabolism. That goes back to the whole binding affinity constant, things like that, and positive antagonism. And there's also some spillover to, I believe, growth hormone-related receptors and things like that. But that's kind of the difference in a protonophore translocator, as easy as it can be talked about. Now, the cool thing about this product is that with BAM15, you can also do a good job of, because what's this doing? This is making mitochondria inefficient. So in a specific type of cell, not saying the name because I had a seminar out there on my last YouTube channel and that got taken down. So if we are modulating the mitochondria within a C cell, those mitochondria in here rely upon glutathione levels to actually thrive. So taking exogenous glutathione in that C-based scenario, actually, I guess I could say it. I've said cancer before in here. I'll say it. In those cancer cells, it's relying upon glutathione coming in. It's fueling those. If we can make those mitochondria very inefficient, it can flux a lot of cool cascades to ultimately drive apoptosis. So with BAM15, we can make the mitochondria of cancer cells inefficient, which will ultimately drive apoptosis. So BAM15, again, that's a secondary quaternary, that's a later cascade. We are mainly utilizing BAM15 in our world, mainly for the body composition benefits. This is going to be our biggest player to improve beta oxidation and technically lipolysis. Remember, lipolysis is going in glycerol head. So you see here? Yeah. So fatty acid, glycerol head, tails. Lipases come in here, snip off the tails, push these out into here, push the glycerol head out there. ultimately go downstream to get into the mitochondria, beta oxidation. That's how that works. So this is our biggest player, our biggest fat loss-based player, right? FX11, we're sticking in the cancer-based world really quick. This is where we are taking at the whole process, because if you look at cancer cells, they thrive on glycogen. So if you can literally blunt glycolysis via a couple different cascades and modulate the whole lactate conversation, you can start to slowly kill off these cancer cells. So FX11 comes in to actually downregulate glycolysis to ultimately help to drive more cancer cell apoptosis and help drive that cancer cell inefficiency, basically. So now we have Neuropept and Dihexa. So Neuropept is the one that does a lot of things, like all these, right? Neuropept is super cool because beyond the brain-derived neurotrophic factor changes, it ameliorates glutamate toxicity. So as you are someone who's taken, I don't know, a couple hundred milligrams of caffeine from your pre-workout, right? Having a couple cups of coffee, that glutamate levels building up in your brain coming from the overstimulation of an oversympathetic person. As that happens, you need to actually pull down those glutamate levels. Neuropept does that extremely well. Neuropept drives that overall neuronal communication to drive focus, to drive verbal fluidity, to drive memory recall, to drive the entire memory solidification process. Neuropept is the one, to me, that's either going to be a speech player or a memory player. So depending on how you want to use it, and again, does other things, but this is mainly going to be memory and speech. And again, not a peptide, I get it, I know, nootropic, but it's in this whole world, right? All these traditional peptide companies are also selling a lot of these nootropic compounds because they're in this kind of gray area, weird stuff, medicine 3.0. So Dihexa, that's the one that can drive, and again, I don't like the original research and how it was marketed. It was marketed to be like, oh, what was it, like 10 million times more BDNF than whatever compound. I didn't like that because Dihexa to me is the communicator. So this is where you're allowing neurons to actually communicate with each other. That's extremely important because then every bit of neuroplasticity from there can improve. So Dihexa can also drive focus, can also drive memory consolidation. Dihexa is not something it's not something I prefer people to take to feel. We take this to complement everything else in circulation, not to make you better now, but to make you better tomorrow and weeks from now. So to me, this is more of the genomic player, whereas Neuropept is the non-genomic player. Always going to be spillover from the non-genomic to genomic world, but to me, Dihexa is a longer-term player when we're looking at really overall neuronal communication and changes in synapses. So to me, this is going to be our overall neuronal communicator. Getting thirsty again. And then if we're here, we might as well be talking about Dihexa, Cell-Link, and things like that. Kind of run out of room. We'll do that then. We'll do, actually I can wait for that. Cell-Link, Cmax, cerebrolysine. I'm going to throw a different one up here too. We'll do Tadefkrapep alpha, which you guys know I've talked about beforehand. And we'll also throw in tadalafil, right? Is that how you spell it? I think I spelled that wrong. Tadalafil, yeah, there we go. Extra A in there, not an I. Okay, so Cell-Link Cmax on paper should be basically the same thing. Again, if the chemistry was exactly the same, then potentially the same, but they're not chemically, they're completely different in reality. What we're mainly looking here is trying to delineate these two. So to me, you can utilize both of them. So I should take a step back. Cell-Link to me is more of the overall BDNF driver to drive learning, memory, all that kind of fun stuff. Whereas Cmax is the player to modulate dopamine, serotonin, the prefrontal cortex. So the cascade that you push down neurologically is going to ultimately change the end fate. So BDNF Cell-Link wise, it can also be, and I really like it as being the anxiolytic aid. So what we see, my marker's dying. Cell-Link as being the major anxiolytic aid. This one is super cool over in my Archer-based world, NFL players, their quarterbacks, things like that. This is when you need focus. This one you need concentration in a low arousal state. This also has a lot of validity over in the strength-based communities. If you're the powerlifter or the strongman who's getting way jacked up, back before you're actually going out to complete your event or complete your lift, you're just blowing your wad in terms of just pushing out tons of acetylcholine. You're wasting that acetylcholine. You're wasting all of those sympathetic neurons. Like, save them. Wait, you're gonna blow them out in a second. Hold on to them. That's where cell link can really come in. Can also, again, still drive the focus, but keep things in a lower arousal state. Whereas something like a Cmax, I tend to prefer that because, again, that's more of the dopamine, the prefrontal cortex. That's for the person that needs the changes to memory, needs the changes to learning, needs all those neurological changes to drive neuroplasticity, but doesn't need the anxiolytic aid. So if you're trying to delineate between these two, if someone needs to be in that low arousal state, cell link, focus. If you don't need that low arousal state, Cmax. To me, that's the biggest delineator between these two things. You do a lot of other things, but that's how I like to break it down. So we're going to say if you need anxiolytic aid, and then if you don't need it, as in anxiolytic aid. And again, that's also going to change based on if you're a dopamine head or if you're a BDNF head. Everyone has certain neurotransmitters that they just thrive on. Like for me, I obviously don't need more dopamine. I'm pretty good there. I'm always happy. So to me, I would thrive more so with a cell link because I don't need more dopamine from Cmax. I would need the BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, from the actual cell link. Now, cerebral lysine. We were talking about all of these different neurotrophic factors. This is where we have brain-derived neurotrophic factor, glial cell line-derived neurotrophic factor, the classical neurotrophic factors, and, the somatropic basic neurotrophic factors. Those are 4 different ways, 4 different categories of neurotrophic compounds with different cool little constituents and players in there that can drive everything neuroplasticity-wise. We were talking about repair. We're talking about reductions in inflammation. We're talking about improvements to speech memory. We're talking about improvements to motor cortex functioning, changes all around the brain. If you're trying to look for the overall repair-based player, I think cerebral lysine is the best one out there. So to me, if you want overall neuronal repair, that is the one we would bring in. And again, that's the one that would generally be done. I prefer it on like a rest day. So a lot of my entrepreneurs, 7, 10 figure people, these are the people that on their rest days, they just work for 6 days straight. They get 6 hours off on Sunday morning. They get right back to work. That morning, on Sunday morning, we would take a pretty big bolus of cerebral lysine. On top of that, if you look at a lot of the Alzheimer, dementia, Parkinson's, all neurological related diseases, tends to work extremely well, but those are usually IV, usually done 50, 60, 70, 100 plus mils. And then you have to change the drip rate. Some people can have a pretty terrible response to those higher doses as well. So we always start low, but cerebral lysine, to me, primary recovery. I think that's the coolest overall neurological recovery-based player. Tau-DEF alpha. We've talked about this beforehand multiple times now. This is the one that's going to literally stop all of those cascades from binding to drive myostatin levels. So we're taking tau-DEF alpha to stop the binding process to limit myostatin. The problem with this one is that if you blunt myostatin too much, you always have immune-based problems. So in this world, this is going to be your biggest muscle-based player, right? So we're going to say anabolism. And I will trust that you guys will remember that it's all going to be all through that myostatin-based cascade. To me, it's going to be one of the better anabolism players of all these as well, kind of along with oxytocin, but it's all through the myostatin cascade. But remember, these myostatin inhibitors work extremely well, but you're never going to wake up like the Belgium blue cows or whatever they are that they're the myostatin deficient. It does not work like that, but it's another good tool. So tau-DEF alpha is one that we're slowly catching on steam. I'll be formulating for people, be out, cool stuff. We're going to go to tadalafil, so Cialis. I'm putting it up here because, again, usually these places sell the same things, and this is usually one of them. 2 reasons. We're going to go with a primary and a secondary reason why we would use this. Beyond the hemodynamic flow, what it does is it actually modulates a couple upstream cascades going through that phosphodiesterase 5, going downstream to protein kinase G. That's the one. I had to go back to my memory bank for that. Thank you, Mr. Neuopept. Goes through those cascades to literally reduce cardiac fibrosis. So if you were someone who had a cardiac myopathy, cardiac event, this can come in to literally reduce cardiac fibrosis and a couple of things as well cardiac-wise, but does that really good. On top of doing a couple of the cool things neurologically. One of them is improving the transportation of fatty acids into neurological tissue. Add, I believe, tadalafil, all the phils, adenofils, sildenafil, all this potential, and then baby aspirin also does this as well. So we're looking at the actual transportation of fatty acids into neural tissue. So to me, tadalafil has those kind of two cool things that make it a little bit more unique that we probably don't see with a lot of other ones. Again, this can go on and on because if we're changing hemodynamics, that means we're changing potential rates of nutrient partitioning, which means more anabolism, which means more blood flow going to working tissue, which means more of a potential to lose body fat. You can go down the list of indirect cascades, but to me, that's kind of where that one really, really shines. So with all of those in mind, I think we kind of have to talk about glutathione, right? Because we're here, we're talking about it anyway. I always like to bring it up. So I know there's a lot of individuals out there that don't like the IM sub-Q routes of glutathione because they don't see those actual cellular levels change when in reality we do. So if you look at endogenous glutathione transportation, the cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulator families, the multi-drug resistance related protein families, there's all these different families. There's tons of these families endogenously that all works in conjunction to get glutathione into the cell. So that was never a good argument because we just never saw that play out. And you can also see the effects biofeedback-wise just by having application of glutathione through your medical provider or however you choose to apply it. We're talking about not oral encapsulations though. And the glutathione, what if we're trying to rank them, because oral glutathione is still good, it's decent. If we're trying to rank them though, we're looking at the traditional IM/IV sub-Q being kind of optimal. Then we go to the liposomal route. Then we kind of go downstream to the other kind of traditional oral preparations and things like that. So we kind of have this, three-tier way of looking at it. They're all beneficial. All glutathione's good. It's more how much and how much actual, chemical signaling do we even need in the first place. So traditional ones, the lowest, liposomal, some other preparations, topical, are kind of that second tier. Highest tier is going to be these other traditional intramuscular, subcutaneous, and IV-based applications. This is going to be the thing that drives up cellular repair. So whereas we had the neural repair with the cerebral lysine, to me, cerebral lysine is the best neurological repair player. Glutathione is everything else repair. And there's still the healing to neurological tissue, but it's not the same as cerebral lysine. Everything exists on that ratio between reduced, usable, to oxidized, unusable glutathione. So it's all based on these intra-extracellular ratios. We are trying to have as high a possible levels of our actual reduced glutathione and lower levels of our oxidized. Once it's oxidized, we have the 2-sulfide donor, break it apart, we talked about this beforehand, and then you get more GSH. Again, though, if you are in the cancer community, just because we mentioned it already, your glutathione could be potentiating and fueling your cancer cells. So this is where a lot of glutathione therapies can actually start to work against your chemo, against your radiation, because it's literally fueling cancer cell growth. So that's not to say that glutathione therapy doesn't have a place in cancer patients. It's just at what point, because you have to let mitochondrial ROS build up in cancer to allow those cancer cells, those tumors, to kill themselves off. So glutathione is a better infrequent player for a lot of cancer-based patients. Again, depends on what you're going through, but everyone else glutathione-wise, it's an amazing player. I tend to like the frequency of 1 to 3 times per week, usually on rest days, so it's gonna have a high amount of cellular repair, unless if you're under a high amount of oxidative and inflammatory load. If you have all this inflammation building up, all this oxidation building up, you might need to use it as a daily player, just lower dosed. So I think with that, we are gonna call it. There are a lot of other compounds we can get into. The problem is I'm starting to get excited and I'm gonna start talking about things that I probably shouldn't talk about. And even now I'm debating in my head of if I should just do it or not. But because of the things I have going on in the background with the political group and then also with 2 other consulting groups that I'm doing some stuff with, I don't think it would be smart to talk about some other things that are coming out. Know that there are a lot of cool things coming down the pipeline. There are some really cool different therapies for the canine community. So some longevity drugs coming out there. We have some cool drugs over in the soft tissue, articular cartilage-based world. The one actually we can't talk about is alflutop. That's been around forever. I'm going to put this into this category, right? That one's more than fine to talk about. It's not one of the ones that are new. It's going to be coming out. Flutop's been around forever. This is over in the marine biology-based world. So we're looking at this doing some really awesome things. One of the coolest things is it actually drives up superoxide dismutase levels. So remember, go back to evolution, right? Go back to how mitochondria formed. Look at those receptors in there. Glutathione receptor, superoxide dismutase receptor. There's the chlorella. Like there's only a couple receptors in there, right? If we're looking at superoxide dismutase, that's one of the things once we hit 30, downregulates. On top of what, so alflutop in and of itself could be a massive longevity player, literally just to drive up superoxide dismutase levels. Why do we tend to use it though? It will improve chondrocyte metabolism. It will improve soft tissue repair. It's one of the best never talked about cartilage joint-based recovery players out there. So alflutop is one that you can use either secondary, or rather we'll say primary, as a joint repair aid, or secondarily as just a long-term immune system-based aid. So this is definitely something you could have once a week, something like that, just to replace and drive up more endogenous superoxide dismutase levels for baseline health. So if you're trying to get like the best overall, best case scenario, you could literally use alflutop glutathione because you're stimulating those glutathione receptors intracellular mitochondria, as well as stimulate the superoxide dismutase receptors. Then you take another step further, and now you're looking at good old Mr. Methylene Blue, right? Methylene Blue is one of the coolest ones that we're talking about here, and again, can be used for multiple different reasons. Primarily, it's the only compound out there. It's not the only one actually, but it does a really good job of actually increasing, I might have to call it, my marker's running out, increasing cerebral metabolic rate, CMR. So this is the thing that allows your brain to partition glucose, to partition acetylcholine, to partition ketones. This is the thing that can allow you to hyper-regulate how fast your brain is working. Take too much, and then blah, 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 you talk too fast, you can't get a word out. But you take the right amount, and all of a sudden, as a nootropic aid goes up. We also see the changes to complexes in mitochondria. So this is not a natural cascade, it's a chemically induced cascade, whether you're talking about methylene blue or leukomethylene blue, but we'll talk about that in different scenario, different podcast, different seminar, different something. You can take this to modulate those cascades. You can take these to modulate that whole photonic exchange if you're trying to get more out of your sunlight or out of your red light therapy. You can take it to be a basic antiviral, antibacterial as you're actually flying, traveling, things like that. That's why I haven't been sick in over a year, knock on something. Methylene blue is just another tremendous compound that you can keep utilizing in conjunction with other compounds out there that, again, it's not a peptide, but I'm putting it into the same category because if not, you end up accidentally leaving things out. And to me, this is the whole, and I don't like the word biohacking, by the way. My presentation, by the way, at the end of the month at FOH Live with Jay Campbell and everyone, it's called Biohacking in the Future. I said that because it's a popular term, so people are going to really look forward to it. But I do not like the term biohacking, but I love what it stands for because we are trying to improve on ourselves in every single way. So other than the traditional methods, to me, these are like the non-traditional methods and players that are generally going to be socially acceptable soon. And because of the role that I believe I'm going to be playing in there, I need to get more of this information out there so that as things are hitting mainstream, I could say that. As things are hitting mainstream, then things are a little bit easier understood and why certain things are written and portrayed in this light. Because you can't literally go down the route of saying, oh, methylene blue anti-cancer. It does that. You can't say FX11 or BAM15 anti-cancer. They do them, but it goes against chemotherapy. It goes against, and it doesn't have to be, it can be used in conjunction, but it can't be marketed like that. So BAM15 is the beta oxidative player. FX11 is the downregulatory player in glycolysis. Methylene blue is the cerebral metabolic rate player. And you get what I'm saying. So that's part of what I believe, because I haven't actually been told. So the role that I've been playing in that consulting fashion has really been that of educator. And from what I understand, based off of that last text I got this morning, that's going to be my big role moving forward. So I really, really like that. And I think it's important to understand how we can talk about these things mainstream without fighting big pharma, because that's where the problem is. We're not trying to use medicine 3.0 to replace any pharmaceuticals out there. We're trying to take them to complement all of our therapies out there. So with that, guys, thank you so much for watching. I could keep going on, but we're going to call it there. Check out thepepcoach.com. There's going to be a lot more of this stuff coming because, again, apparently I have to now. Have a great day, guys.